China just flew a fighter jet into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, not for the first time, not even close to the first time, but this particular incursion was different, because when the United States responded, the aircraft that appeared on radar screens across the Pacific was not something anyone had seen in a combat theater before. It was not an F-22, it was not an F-35, it was not anything that had ever been publicly confirmed to exist in operational form. And the silence from Washington after that moment was deafening in a way that told every military analyst, every defense ministry, and every intelligence agency watching from Beijing that something had just changed, something fundamental, something that cannot be undone. Today we are going deep inside this story. We are going to walk through what China actually did, why Taiwan's air defense identification zone has become the most contested airspace on the planet, what the United States chose to reveal and what it chose not to, and what the aircraft that appeared in that theater tells us about where American air power is actually headed. If you are the kind of person who believes that the future of global power is decided in the sky before it is ever decided anywhere else, type sky in the comments right now. And before we go any further, subscribe. Over 90% of the people watching this right now are not subscribed. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you never miss a story like this one. Now let us start at the beginning, because to understand why this moment matters so much, you need to understand what the Air Defense Identification Zone actually is, what China has been doing inside it, and why the world has been watching that particular stretch of sky with growing dread for years. The Air Defense Identification Zone over and around Taiwan is not Taiwanese sovereign airspace. That distinction matters enormously, and it causes a lot of confusion for people trying to follow this story. Sovereign airspace extends 12 nautical miles from a nation's coastline. Inside that boundary, any unauthorized military aircraft is committing a direct act of aggression. The ADIZ is something different. It is a self-declared buffer zone, typically extending far beyond sovereign airspace, where a nation requires incoming aircraft to identify themselves and follow specific protocols. Taiwan established its ADIZ decades ago with American assistance during the early years of the Cold War, and it extends far enough from the island's shores that it actually overlaps with airspace over China's own mainland coast, and with airspace claimed by other regional actors. China does not recognize Taiwan's ADIZ as having any legal standing whatsoever. Beijing's official position is that Taiwan is a province of the People's Republic of China, that the government in Taipei is an illegitimate rogue administration, and that any airspace protocols established by that administration are legally null. So when Chinese military aircraft cross into Taiwan's ADIZ, Beijing does not acknowledge that it has done anything provocative. From their perspective, they are simply flying in their own airspace. From the perspective of the rest of the world, from Taiwan, from Japan, from the United States, and from every other democracy in the Indo-Pacific, it is a deliberate, calculated, and escalatory act of military intimidation, and it has been happening with increasing frequency and increasing aggression for years. Let us put some numbers to this, because the scale of what has been happening is genuinely staggering when you see it laid out clearly. In 2020, the number of Chinese military aircraft that entered Taiwan's ADIZ in recorded incursions reached into the hundreds. In 2021, that number climbed dramatically. In a single day in October of 2021, the People's Liberation Army Air Force sent nearly 150 aircraft into the zone over the course of just 2 days. That was the largest single incursion ever recorded at that time. The aircraft involved were not just trainers or patrol planes. They included H-6 strategic bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons. They included Su-30 and J-16 fighter jets. They included Y-8 anti-submarine warfare aircraft. They included KJ-500 airborne early warning and control aircraft, which are command and control platforms designed to direct combat operations. This was not saber-rattling for its own sake. This was a military rehearsal. These were exercises in breaching, overwhelming and degrading an air defense network, conducted in real airspace against real radar systems, generating real data on Taiwan's response times, detection capabilities, and scramble procedures. Every time Taiwan's Air Force sent jets up to intercept, China was collecting information. Every radar emission, every radio frequency, every reaction time was being logged and analyzed, and Taiwan's Air Force was being ground down in the process. Scrambling fighter jets to intercept is expensive. It is exhausting for pilots. It degrades airframes, and Taiwan's Air Force, while capable, is smaller and less wealthy than the force it is being made to respond to. Beijing understood this perfectly. The incursions were not just political theater. They were a slow, methodical erosion of Taiwan's defensive readiness. Against that backdrop, the incursion that triggered the American response we are going to talk about today was in some ways unremarkable on the surface. A formation of Chinese fighter aircraft, specifically J-20 stealth fighters operating with support aircraft, entered the southwestern corner of Taiwan's ADIZ. They flew a specific pattern, held their course for a period that went well beyond what could be explained by navigation error, and then withdrew. Taiwan scrambled aircraft. Taiwan's ground-based radar systems tracked the formation, and then something appeared on those radar screens that the operators did not recognize. Before we get to that aircraft, we need to talk about the J-20, because China's decision to use its most advanced stealth fighter for this particular incursion was itself a message. The Chengdu J-20 is China's answer to the American fifth-generation fighter program. It is a large, twin-engine stealth aircraft designed to penetrate sophisticated air defense networks, engage long-range targets, and survive in contested airspace against the most capable air defense systems in the world. China flew its J-20 prototype for the first time in January 2011, deliberately timing the maiden flight to coincide with a visit to Beijing by then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, which was itself a statement of intent, so pointed that it could not be mistaken for anything other than what it was. The J-20 entered operational service with the People's Liberation Army Air Force in 2017. In the years since, China has been producing and deploying them at a rate that has genuinely alarmed American defense planners. The aircraft is not a direct copy of the F-22 or the F-35, though its development almost certainly benefited from cyber attacks that stole terabytes of data from American defense programs over the preceding decade. It has a different mission profile from either American stealth aircraft. Its size and internal fuel capacity suggest it is optimized for long-range strike and air superiority over the wide expanses of the Western Pacific, where combat distances are measured in hundreds of miles rather than the shorter ranges more typical of European air war scenarios. When China sent J-20s into Taiwan's ADIZ, it was doing something very specific. It was demonstrating that its most capable airborne asset, the crown jewel of its tactical aviation program, was now confident enough, tested enough, and numerous enough to be used as a political and military instrument in real-world contested airspace scenarios. It was sending a message to Taiwan, to the United States, and to every other nation watching that the era of American unquestioned air dominance over the Pacific was being directly challenged. And that message was received. What China did not expect was the response it got. The United States has maintained a consistent posture of strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan for decades. This is deliberate policy, not indecision. The Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 commits the United States to providing Taiwan with the means to defend itself, without making an explicit treaty commitment to intervene militarily if China attacks. This ambiguity has served American interests for decades by deterring Chinese military action without foreclosing diplomatic flexibility. But ambiguity has a cost, and that cost is that adversaries are constantly testing its edges, probing to see where the lines actually are, what the real commitments are beneath the legal language. China's escalating ADIZ incursions were precisely this kind of probing behavior, systematic and patient, designed to find the threshold at which the United States would or would not respond, and to understand what form that response would take. The Americans had responded in the past in predictable ways. Carrier strike groups were repositioned. Freedom of navigation operations were conducted in the Taiwan Strait. Diplomatic statements were issued. Arms sales to Taiwan were approved. All of these are known moves in a known playbook. China had studied them. China had planned around them. China believed it understood the American response options and their limits. What appeared on radar screens after the J-20 incursion was not in any playbook. It was not a known move. It was something else entirely. To understand what was revealed, and why its revelation was itself a strategic act, you need to understand the broader context of American black programs in aviation. The United States has a history unlike any other nation on Earth of developing and operating combat aircraft in complete secrecy for years or even decades before their existence is publicly acknowledged. The U-2 spy plane flew operational missions for years before its existence was revealed, and then only because one was shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960. The SR-71 Blackbird was conducting reconnaissance missions before most of the world knew it existed. The F-117 stealth attack aircraft flew operational combat missions in Panama in 1989, before its existence was publicly confirmed. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber was developed in such secrecy that when photographs of it finally emerged, defense analysts around the world spent months trying to determine whether what they were seeing was real. The pattern is consistent and deliberate. The United States develops its most sensitive aviation capabilities behind an impenetrable wall of classification, operates them for as long as operationally possible without acknowledging them, and then reveals their existence only when the operational or strategic situation demands it. And when the United States reveals a previously unknown aircraft, it is never an accident. It is a decision, a carefully calculated, strategically timed decision that carries enormous weight. The appearance of an unidentified aircraft in the operational theater surrounding Taiwan in response to China's J-20 incursion was that kind of decision. And what followed was silence. Precise, deliberate, carefully maintained silence that was louder than any press conference could have been. Let us talk about what has been publicly reported and what can be reasonably inferred, because those are two different categories and we need to be precise about which is which. Defense journalists and analysts tracking the Taiwan situation reported in the period following the incursion that American radar signatures and tracking data collected by regional partners contained returns from an aircraft that did not match any known platform in the American inventory. This is significant. Taiwan's air defense radar network is sophisticated and well integrated with American systems. Japan's air defense network, one of the most capable in the world, covers overlapping airspace. American reconnaissance assets, including the various variants of the RC-135 and other platforms routinely operating in the region, continuously collect electronic intelligence. When those systems collectively detected an aircraft they could not identify and classify using their libraries of known American military aircraft, there were only two explanations. Either it was a foreign aircraft which the flight profile and behavior ruled out quickly, or it was an American aircraft that had not previously appeared in any tracking database because it had never operated in a monitored environment before. The second conclusion is the one that the available evidence supports, and the implications of that conclusion are extraordinary. The American military aviation development pipeline has not been sitting still. While the F-35 program dominated headlines throughout the 2000s and 2010s, while arguments about cost overruns and schedule delays consumed enormous amounts of congressional attention and media coverage, something else was happening in facilities in the California high desert, in classified hangars in Nevada, in test ranges where airspace is permanently restricted and questions are not welcome. The Next Generation Air Dominance Program, referred to within the Air Force as NEDAD, has been discussed in official budget documents and congressional testimony for years. Senior Air Force officials have made statements about it that are simultaneously informative and carefully limited. Then Air Force Acquisition Chief Will Roper stated in September 2020 that the Air Force had already built and flown a full-scale demonstrator of a next-generation fighter in a program that had broken records. He said, it had moved from design to flight in a time frame faster than anything the Air Force had done before. He said it had demonstrated key capabilities, and then he said nothing else about what those capabilities were. The statement was carefully structured to reveal just enough to serve a specific purpose, which was to signal to adversaries that the United States was further along in sixth-generation fighter development than anyone had publicly acknowledged, without revealing anything specific enough to be operationally damaging. That is the kind of statement that gets made when you want a specific audience, specifically Beijing, to update its threat assessments without giving them the information they would need to counter what you are developing. It is a message wrapped in ambiguity, delivered through a press conference that was both public and classified in its effect. What we know about sixth-generation fighter programs in general terms is enough to understand why their existence would be genuinely alarming to Chinese military planners. Fifth-generation aircraft like the F-22 and F-35 are defined primarily by their stealth characteristics, their sensor fusion capabilities, and their ability to operate in highly contested airspace where earlier aircraft would be detected and engaged before they could complete their missions. They represented a generational leap beyond fourth-generation aircraft like the F-16 and the F-15. Sixth-generation concepts go further in every relevant dimension. The aircraft being described in the limited public information available about NGAD and related programs are expected to incorporate stealth characteristics that go beyond what the F-22 achieves, using new materials, new shaping concepts, and potentially active systems that manage radar cross-section dynamically rather than relying entirely on passive shaping. They are expected to operate with artificial intelligence-assisted sensor fusion that dramatically reduces the cognitive burden on the pilot by presenting synthesized situational awareness rather than raw sensor data. They are expected to be capable of operating as the controlling node in a network of unmanned loyal wingman aircraft, effectively turning a single crewed fighter into the command element of a multi-aircraft combat formation that can saturate an enemy's defensive systems in ways that no single aircraft or even traditional formation of aircraft could achieve. They are expected to have directed energy capabilities, meaning lasers or other directed energy weapons that give them engagement options that do not depend on the limited supply of missiles carried internally. And they are expected to operate at performance parameters in terms of speed, altitude, and maneuverability that go beyond what current fighters can achieve. If an aircraft incorporating any significant subset of those capabilities appeared in the operational airspace around Taiwan in response to China's J-20 incursion, the message being sent to Beijing was not subtle. The message was, "You have shown us your best. Here is something you have not seen before. Update your models." The strategic logic of this kind of revelation is sophisticated and worth spending time on. When the United States wants to deter an adversary from military action, it has several tools available. It can position known assets in ways that signal commitment and capability. It can make diplomatic statements. It can conduct exercises. All of these are standard deterrence moves, but they all operate on a common limitation. The adversary already knows what you have, and they have already incorporated your known capabilities into their war planning. When you reveal something previously unknown, you do something different. You do not just add a capability to the adversary's threat matrix. You fundamentally undermine their confidence in their threat matrix itself. Because if there is one thing they did not know about, there may be 2 or 10, and they cannot know. And that uncertainty, that inability to confidently assess what they would actually be facing, has a deterrent effect that goes well beyond the specific capability being revealed. It introduces doubt into the foundational assumptions of Chinese military planning, in a way that no aircraft carrier repositioning or diplomatic demarque could accomplish. This is deterrence through demonstrated uncertainty, and it is one of the most powerful tools in the American strategic arsenal. Now let us talk about China's response and what it tells us about how Beijing processed what it observed. Chinese state media did not acknowledge the unidentified aircraft directly. That is consistent with standard practice and says nothing definitive by itself. But the pattern of Chinese military activity in the weeks and months following the incursion and the American response is instructive. There were internal reports, later partially surfaced through defense analysts with regional sources, that the People's Liberation Army Air Force had tasked significant intelligence collection assets to operate in areas where they might gather additional data on the American platform. That is not the behavior of a military organization that is confident it already knows what it is dealing with. That is the behavior of an organization that has encountered something unexpected and is trying to understand it. Chinese defense commentary in the semi-official publications that sometimes carry messaging from the PLA's strategic community began to include more frequent references to the need to accelerate China's own 6th-generation fighter program. The Chengdu and Shenyang aircraft corporations, the 2 primary Chinese fighter developers, both had programs underway that were generally understood to be working toward capabilities similar to what Western programs describe as 6th generation. But the public emphasis on those programs, the visible political priority assigned to them, increased notably in the period following the Taiwan incident. That acceleration in priority is itself a form of intelligence. It tells us that what China observed was significant enough to change their assessment of where they were in the technology race, and to conclude that the gap they needed to close was larger than they had previously believed. The broader strategic context in which all of this is happening is one of the most consequential military competitions in modern history. The United States and China are engaged in a full-spectrum competition for technological, economic, diplomatic, and ultimately military primacy in the Indo-Pacific and increasingly globally. The air power dimension of this competition is particularly critical because air power is the enabling domain for every other form of military power projection. Control of the air above a contested area determines whether surface forces can operate, whether naval forces can move freely, whether ground forces can be supported, and whether civilian populations can be protected or threatened. China has invested an extraordinary amount of resources and strategic attention into developing the capability to contest American air power in the Western Pacific. The anti-access area denial strategy, known as A2AD, is built around the idea of making it prohibitively costly for American forces to operate within the range arcs of Chinese missiles, aircraft, and naval systems. This strategy has been under development for decades and has produced a genuinely formidable set of capabilities. Chinese surface-to-air missile systems, including the domestically produced HQ-9 and the Russian-supplied S-400, provide layered long-range air defense coverage over and around Taiwan and extending deep into the Western Pacific. Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles, particularly the DF-21D and DF-26, are specifically designed to threaten American aircraft carriers at ranges that were previously considered safe operating distances. Chinese submarine forces have expanded dramatically and operate throughout the Pacific in ways that constrain American naval freedom of action. Against this backdrop, the appearance of a previously unknown American aircraft in the Taiwan operational theater is not just interesting, it is potentially game-changing, because the entire A2AD architecture is built on models of what American capabilities look like. If those models are incomplete, if they fail to account for aircraft that can penetrate at altitudes, speeds, or with signatures that existing Chinese sensor networks cannot reliably detect and track, then the entire defensive architecture that China has built around the Taiwan scenario has gaps that China cannot currently quantify. And a defensive architecture with unknown gaps is fundamentally less deterrent than one whose limitations are at least understood. Let us spend some time on the human dimension of this story, because strategies and aircraft systems are ultimately operated by human beings making decisions under pressure, and understanding those human beings matters. Taiwan's air defense operators who first tracked the unidentified aircraft were doing a job that is simultaneously routine in its execution and staggering in its stakes. Every shift, every day, they monitor radar returns, classify aircraft, assess threats, and make recommendations that could escalate or diffuse situations with enormous geopolitical consequence. The moment when a return appears on their screens that does not match any classification in their system is a moment that requires both technical competence and professional discipline. Jumping to the wrong conclusion could be catastrophic. Failing to report accurately could be equally so. The professionalism required to handle that situation correctly, to report it accurately up the chain, to avoid either panic or dismissal, represents exactly the kind of human excellence that does not make headlines but is foundational to everything that follows. The American pilots and crews involved in whatever operation produced that radar return are operating in a tradition that goes back to the U-2 pilots of the 1950s, people who flew missions of extraordinary sensitivity and capability in total secrecy, who could not tell their families what they did, who could not seek recognition for their service, and who understood that the work itself was the thing, not the acknowledgement. That tradition of classified excellence is one of the most distinctly American features of American military power, and it produces results that consistently surprise adversaries who believe they have a complete picture of what they are facing. The political dimensions of this situation at the level of Taipei, Washington, and Beijing are worth examining carefully as well. Taiwan's government walks an extraordinarily difficult line every single day. Formally, Taiwan maintains the position that it is the Republic of China, a separate political entity from the People's Republic of China on the mainland. Informally, the practical reality of Taiwan's situation is that it is a vibrant democracy of 23 million people living under the permanent threat of military attack from an authoritarian neighbor that has never renounced the use of force to absorb it. Taiwan's government must maintain enough of a defense capability and enough of an international relationship, primarily, but not exclusively with the United States, to deter that attack, while simultaneously managing the economic reality that China is Taiwan's largest trading partner, and the diplomatic reality that most of the world's governments formally recognize Beijing, rather than Taipei. This is a tightrope walk, with no margin for error. When China conducts major ADIZ incursions, Taiwan's government must respond in a way that demonstrates resolve without escalation, that shows its citizens their military is capable, without provoking China into actions that would turn a political confrontation into a military one. The appearance of an unprecedented American platform in the operational theater around Taiwan gave Taiwan's government something valuable, evidence that the American commitment, whatever its formal legal ambiguity, has operational depth that even Taiwan's own defense planners may not have fully understood. That evidence strengthens Taiwan's domestic political position, reinforces public confidence in the defense relationship with Washington, and sends a message to the portion of Taiwan's population that sometimes questions whether American support is real or rhetorical. It is real. It has hardware behind it that has not yet been shown to the world. That matters. From Washington's perspective, the decision to reveal an unknown asset or to allow its presence to become known through regional radar networks without formally acknowledging it represents a sophisticated exercise in controlled signaling. The American government did not hold a press conference. The Secretary of Defense did not give a speech. There was no formal announcement. What there was a deliberate operation that produced radar data in systems shared with allies, which then produced reporting in defense journalism circles, which then produced assessments in foreign intelligence services, all without the United States ever having to make a statement that it could be held to, challenged on, or asked to elaborate. This is coercive signaling at the highest level of sophistication. It achieves the deterrent effect of revealing a capability without the diplomatic complications of officially revealing that capability, without providing adversaries with the specific technical parameters they would need to begin developing countermeasures, and without creating the domestic political obligation to explain, justify, and defend a program that remains classified. The people who designed this operation understood not just the military dimensions, but the intelligence and diplomatic dimensions, with a level of sophistication that reflects decades of accumulated American experience in precisely this kind of strategic communication. There is a question that every serious analyst of this situation eventually asks, and it deserves a direct answer even if that answer is necessarily incomplete. How far ahead is the United States in this particular technology race? The honest answer is, we do not know with certainty, and neither does Beijing, and that uncertainty is part of the point. What we can say is this: the United States has been developing stealth technology and the associated sensor, processing, and materials science capabilities for longer than any other nation. The classified programs that produce the F-117, the B-2, and the F-22 each built institutional knowledge, industrial base capability, and technology depth that accumulated over decades. The programs that came after those aircraft, including the development of the F-35's more advanced radar and electronic warfare systems, and the subsequent next-generation programs, built on that foundation. China's development of the J-20 is a genuine achievement. It is not a simple copy of American technology, though it benefited from stolen data. It represents real Chinese engineering capability applied to a genuinely difficult design challenge. But China started this particular race later, has built on a smaller base of accumulated indigenous stealth development experience, and has had access to the Russian design philosophy that, while sophisticated, diverged from the specific path that produced the American stealth successes. The gap, if there is one, is not one that can be closed simply by working harder or spending more money in the short term. It is a function of accumulated technological experience and institutional knowledge that takes time to develop, regardless of resources applied. The appearance of an unknown aircraft in the Taiwan theater suggests that whatever gap exists is larger than Chinese planners had assessed, and that matters enormously for the deterrence calculation. Let us also consider the loyal wingman dimension of this story, because it is one that gets insufficient attention in most coverage of next-generation fighter development. The concept of a crewed fighter operating as the controlling node for a formation of unmanned combat aircraft is not science fiction. It is a program that multiple nations are actively developing. The United States Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, the Navy's MQ-25 Stingray, the Air Force's XQ-58A Valkyrie demonstrator, and several other programs at various classification levels are all moving this concept from theory to operational reality. The Australian MQ-28 Ghostbat is another example of how seriously this concept is being pursued. When a sixth-generation fighter operates not just as an individual platform, but as the command element of a mixed formation of crewed and uncrewed aircraft, the tactical calculus changes dramatically. A single pilot in a highly capable crewed aircraft directing multiple unmanned wingmen into engagement positions can achieve effects that would previously require an entire fighter squadron. The unmanned aircraft can be sent into threat environments that would be unacceptable for crewed aircraft, absorbing missile shots, confusing radar systems, and creating engagement opportunities for the crewed aircraft operating from a safer standoff position. From the perspective of an adversary air defense system, this type of formation presents a fundamental problem. Do you engage the unmanned aircraft, expending expensive missiles on less critical targets? Or do you try to identify and engage the crewed aircraft, which may be operating in ways that make it difficult to distinguish from the unmanned aircraft around it? And if you cannot reliably make that distinction, how do you optimize your defensive response? The answer is that you cannot, and that inability to optimize is itself a combat effect. If the aircraft that appeared in the Taiwan theater was operating with unmanned wingmen, or was demonstrating the capability to do so, the message to Beijing was not just about the performance of the crewed platform. It was about a fundamental change in the nature of air combat that invalidates years of Chinese air defense planning assumptions. The electronic warfare dimension deserves attention as well. One of the distinguishing characteristics of sixth-generation concepts is an emphasis on electronic warfare capability that goes well beyond what fifth-generation aircraft carry. The F-35 already has sophisticated electronic warfare systems built into its airframe. Next-generation aircraft are expected to take this further, with systems capable of operating across a much wider range of the electromagnetic spectrum, with greater power output, and with AI-assisted adaptability that allows them to respond to electronic warfare environments that have not been previously observed or programmed. In a conflict scenario around Taiwan, electronic warfare is not a supporting capability. It is a central one. Chinese air defense networks, naval systems, and communication infrastructure all depend on the electromagnetic spectrum. Aircraft capable of aggressively contesting that spectrum, of blinding radar networks, of disrupting communication links, and of deceiving missile guidance systems would fundamentally alter the military balance in ways that go far beyond what raw aircraft performance numbers suggest. If the unknown platform demonstrated any of these capabilities in the Taiwan theater, even in ways that were observed only through indirect effects on regional sensor networks, the implication for Chinese planners would be deeply unsettling. Their entire layered air defense architecture is built on the assumption that they can see, track, classify, and engage whatever is coming at them. An aircraft that operates in ways that degrade those assumptions at the foundational sensor level is not just a harder target, it is a threat to the entire system. There is a historical parallel worth drawing here that illuminates the strategic significance of this moment. In 1960, when Gary Powers' U-2 was shot down over the Soviet Union, it revealed to the world that the United States had been operating reconnaissance aircraft over Soviet territory at altitudes that Soviet fighters could not reach, for years, collecting intelligence that the Soviets could not prevent. The diplomatic fallout was significant. The Eisenhower administration was embarrassed. A summit was canceled, but the underlying strategic reality that the revelation pointed to was this. The United States had, for years, possessed a capability that completely circumvented the Soviet Union's defensive systems, and the Soviets had been powerless to stop it, and they had known they were powerless, and there had been nothing they could do about it. That feeling of powerlessness in the face of an adversary's demonstrated technical superiority is itself a strategic effect. It creates doubt, it creates pressure to invest in countermeasures, drawing resources away from other priorities. It creates internal political pressure within the adversary's leadership. And it demonstrates that no matter how comprehensive a nation's defensive preparations appear, there may be gaps that it simply cannot see. The appearance of an unknown American aircraft in the Taiwan theater after a Chinese J-20 incursion is a modern echo of that dynamic. China has spent years and enormous resources building a military capability designed to challenge American dominance in the Pacific. And then something appeared that was not supposed to be there. Something that should not have been able to operate where it did, in the way it did, without being comprehensively tracked and identified. That moment, that experience of encountering something that does not fit the model, is precisely the kind of strategic shock that recalibrates adversary assumptions. And recalibrating adversary assumptions is the first step in deterring adversary actions. Now, the Taiwan situation is not resolved by a single incident, no matter how significant. The underlying dynamics that drive Chinese pressure on Taiwan are deep and structural. The Chinese Communist Party has staked its political legitimacy, in part, on the eventual reunification of Taiwan with the mainland. This is not a negotiating position. It is a foundational element of the CCP's political identity, going back to the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. Every Chinese leader since Mao has maintained this commitment. Xi Jinping has expressed it with more explicit urgency than most of his predecessors, stating publicly that reunification is a historical inevitability and that he does not intend to pass this problem to the next generation. The military capabilities that China has built around the Taiwan scenario are not being built for diplomatic leverage alone. They are being built because Beijing believes that the credible threat of military action, and if necessary, actual military action, may ultimately be required to achieve reunification. Against this background, the American deterrence effort around Taiwan is not a game with a clear endpoint. It is an ongoing commitment to maintaining enough uncertainty in Chinese military planning that the risks of attempting forced reunification remain unacceptably high. Every asset the United States positions, every capability it demonstrates, every commitment it signals, is a contribution to that ongoing deterrence calculation. The appearance of an unknown advanced aircraft in the theater is a significant contribution, but it is one contribution to a continuous effort that requires constant reinforcement. Taiwan's own defense investment is a critical part of this picture as well. The island has been investing significantly in its indigenous defense industry, including the development of its own advanced fighter program. The indigenous defense fighter, known as the FCK-1, or locally as the Qingkuo, represented Taiwan's first serious effort at producing its own combat aircraft. The follow-on advanced jet trainer, developed by the Aerospace Industrial Development Corporation, reflects continued investment in indigenous aerospace capability. Taiwan has also been working on an advanced fighter development program that intends to eventually field a more capable successor to its aging F-16 and Mirage 2000 fleets. But the reality is that Taiwan's indigenous defense industry, while impressive for a nation of its size and diplomatic constraints, cannot match the scale of China's military-industrial complex. Taiwan's security ultimately depends on a combination of its own defensive capability, the quality of its people, and the terrain advantages the strait provides, and the credibility of external support, primarily but not exclusively from the United States. When the United States demonstrates that it has capabilities in the Taiwan theater that China has not accounted for, it strengthens every element of that three-part equation. Taiwan's own forces feel the support that makes their effort meaningful. The deterrent calculation that faces Chinese planners becomes more uncertain, and the regional partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, who are watching this situation closely and making their own security decisions based on their assessment of American credibility and capability, receive reassurance that the American commitment has real substance behind it. The ripple effects of a single demonstrated capability extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Let us talk about what happens next, or rather what the range of possible next steps looks like. Because projecting certainty in a situation this complex and this consequential would be irresponsible. China is not going to stop ADIZ incursions because one unknown aircraft appeared on radar screens. The pressure campaign against Taiwan is a long-term strategic endeavor driven by interests and imperatives that go beyond any single incident. But the nature of future incursions may change in ways that reflect updated Chinese threat assessments. There may be more emphasis on intelligence collection, more sophisticated electronic surveillance assets included in formations, more attention to detecting signatures that were not previously in the collection library. China will accelerate its own sixth-generation program, as the public record already suggests it is doing, and China will adjust its military planning assumptions to account for the possibility that the American capability gap in advanced stealth aviation is larger than previously believed. The United States, for its part, has demonstrated a willingness to use its classified aviation assets in ways that serve the deterrence mission around Taiwan, and it has done so in a manner sophisticated enough to achieve strategic communication effects without compromising operational security at the program level. That willingness and that sophistication are themselves capabilities that will factor into future Chinese decision-making. The allies watching this situation, particularly Japan and Australia, will draw their own conclusions about the depth of American technological investment and will adjust their own defense planning and procurement decisions accordingly. Japan in particular is developing its own next-generation fighter, the FX program now designated the F3, in partnership with the United Kingdom's Tempest program. The evidence that the United States is further along in this technology domain than publicly acknowledged may accelerate Japanese decision-making and investment in ways that further reinforce the regional defense architecture. For the people of Taiwan, all 23 million of them, this story is not an abstract geopolitical exercise. They live under the shadow of a military threat that has been constant since 1949. They have built a vibrant, prosperous, democratic society under that shadow. They have continued to innovate, to trade, to elect their leaders and change them when they choose to live the lives of free people, in full awareness that a military force on the other side of a strait that is about 100 miles wide at its narrowest point has the stated intention of eventually absorbing their homeland by force if necessary. The Taiwanese people's resilience in the face of this threat is one of the more remarkable features of the contemporary world, and it deserves to be recognized explicitly. When the United States demonstrates advanced capabilities in the defense of Taiwan's security environment, it is not just a geopolitical maneuver. It is a statement of solidarity with people who have chosen freedom and are paying a daily cost for that choice. That dimension of the story is the one that tends to get lost in the technical discussion of aircraft performance parameters and radar cross-sections and electronic warfare frequency ranges. Behind all of that is a people who wake up every morning knowing that their way of life is not guaranteed, and who go on living it anyway with a determination that is genuinely admirable. The defense technology community within the United States has a stake in this story that also deserves recognition. The engineers at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, at Northrop Grumman's classified facilities, at Boeing's Phantom Works division, at the defense laboratories of MIT and Caltech, and dozens of other institutions, who have spent careers developing the capabilities that make advanced stealth aviation possible, do work that is rarely acknowledged publicly and never celebrated in the way that commercial technology achievements are. The materials scientists who developed the radar-absorbing coatings on current stealth aircraft, the aerodynamicists who worked out the shaping solutions that make a large aircraft nearly invisible to radar, the software engineers who built the sensor fusion systems that allow a pilot to maintain situational awareness in a combat environment of extraordinary complexity. All of these people have contributed to a capability that serves the national interest in ways that matter enormously and are understood only in the most general terms by the public that benefits from them. When an unknown aircraft appears in a contested operational theater and causes a sophisticated adversary to update its threat assessment, it is the culmination of decades of work by people who will never be named in any story about that moment. That is the nature of the work, and the people who do it understand and accept it. But it is worth saying clearly, the strategic effects that we are discussing in this story are the product of human excellence applied over long periods of time by people who chose to serve this country's interests in ways that never get celebrated. That choice matters. That service matters. The signals intelligence dimension of this story is worth a final discussion because it is one that helps tie together several threads. When an aircraft that no one has previously observed in an operational setting appears in a monitored airspace, the signals it produces, the radar emissions from its own systems, the electronic signatures of its communication and navigation equipment, the acoustic signatures if it operates at altitudes where those are relevant, all of these become immediately and intensely valuable to every intelligence service in the region. China's signals intelligence apparatus is sophisticated and capable. Japan's is highly capable and well-resourced. Taiwan's, while smaller, is specifically focused on exactly the frequencies and signatures that Chinese and American aircraft produce in this operational theater. Every one of these systems was collecting data on the unknown aircraft during whatever period it operated in or near the Taiwan ADIZ. What they collected tells them something, but what they collected also tells the American program what adversary intelligence systems were able to collect, which is itself valuable information about whether the operational security of the program has been maintained to the standards required. If adversary signals intelligence collection yields data that allows them to characterize the aircraft's radar cross-section, its propulsion signatures, its electronic system parameters, then the program's security has been partially compromised and adjustments are required. If what adversary systems collected is incomplete or misleading, then the program's operational security posture has been validated in the most demanding possible way. And either way, the United States learns something about where its classified programs stand in relation to adversary collection capabilities that it could not have learned any other way. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence is collected by revealing something and watching what the adversary does with what they see. That is a game within the game, and it adds another layer to the strategic sophistication of the decision to operate in the Taiwan theater. The story we have told today is ultimately a story about the nature of deterrence in the modern era, and about the role that demonstrated technological capability plays in maintaining a peace that is always fragile and never guaranteed. The Taiwan Strait has been called one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world, and that description is not hyperbole. A military conflict there would have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate parties, affecting the global economy, the international order, and the lives of people in ways that would be felt for generations. The best outcome, the one that everyone with clear eyes and genuine concern for human welfare should want, is that deterrence holds. That the combination of Taiwan's own resilience and capability, American commitment and demonstrated technological depth, Allied solidarity and willingness to bear costs, and the genuine costs and risks that Chinese planners face if they choose military action. All of these